My name is Bahman Yazdanfar, and this is Voters Echo, a weekly show to discuss the issues that matters for the Torontonian, Ontarian, and mainly Canadians. This show is not supported or funded by anybody. I am not under the payroll of anybody, any entity, any political party. The time for the studio was part of the credit that Dr. James Sears graciously donated to me with no string attached and no affiliation. And I am hoping that I get, if anyone is interested in this show, you can always, there is a button in our website, votersecho.com, that you can click on. And if you wish to continue to see this kind of the show to continue, just donate your money, or if you want to help, just drop me a line. I will be appreciated. Today's guest is not only is a person who has been in the political arena for quite some time, but also I had the privilege to become his friend over the last few years. And without further ado, let me ask him to introduce himself. Will, can you just tell a little bit briefly about yourself? We don't have the whole day, but just briefly.
Yes, I became.
Your name is Will Arlow.
My name is Will Arlow. My political affiliation would be with the Canadian Action Party. I joined that party in 1998 after having got political active in 1997. I've been with the party ever since, and have run in the federal electoral system 7 times, and have been a member of the Advisory Committee of Political Parties in Ottawa since 2006. So a few years down the track there, on the inside, the ACPP is a ad hoc committee that deals with specific issues that arise out of the administration of the Elections Act, the Canada Elections Act. So it's composed of members of the political parties of Canada. They designate representatives and the top echelons of Elections Canada's management. So.
So it is something that is annually, or it is how often this ACC runs?
Well, before the days of fixed elections, it had much more frequent plenary sessions because of the urgency that would appear from time to time on the electoral map, you might say, with respect to a potential election that was out there. So Elections Canada was always trying to be in a state of readiness for an election that could have happened at
any moment, because of the minority governments.
Because of the minority government.
Yeah.
So since the days of majority governments, we haven't met in plenary sessions more often, I think, than 3 times a year. But there's also special working groups that deal with specific problems. So in plenary sessions, there may be special committees set up to deal with specific issues. So meetings are quite frequent, actually.
So let's say in that 2-3 times a year or more.
Yep.
The members or representative of each registered political party in Canada.
Parties, yep.
Go there, where in Ottawa, I believe?
Yeah, Ottawa, Gatineau.
Okay. So you go there for a day?
2 days, two solid days usually.
And
yeah.
2 days, all of the officials or main members of the officials of the Elections Canada come to that meeting.
Right.
And they tell you what they have done, what are the changes, and they ask you for your input, I assume.
What they're dealing with, what they anticipate.
Okay.
And yeah, they look for input and sometimes solutions, and yeah.
In Ontario, we have a similar thing for the Ontario registered political parties, but I personally noticed that regardless of what is our opinion, really I don't see much of a change in the process, in a sense of the legislative, in a change of the law. Is it similar in the federal level, or do you see those suggestions by you guys being implemented to some extent?
It's a mixed bag. For any changes that are advocated for by the political representatives at the ACPP, the chief electoral officer who chairs the meetings will always come back with his pat position, and that is that Elections Canada is not an advocacy group, and it's not their job to advocate for any political party, any particular position, or even for itself.
I understand. It's impartial,
Which is why Elections Canada has stood still for such a bashing by the Conservatives, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's because it's their job to stand still for that. The Conservatives are happy to use them as a whipping boy, and Elections Canada has been taking a pretty serious beating from the Conservatives because they happen to be people of honor and integrity, and don't strike back.
If they are impartial, how come they are more submissive, at least from perspective of the ordinary voters, to the present Conservative Party? Just because of their government, their governing position?
I wouldn't say that they're submissive. They're creatures of the act. So Elections Canada's conduct is spelled out in the act. And the Canada Elections Act is a huge piece of legislation. And there's only so much they can do within their mandate. And of course, as political representatives at those meetings, people like me are always hammering at our own agenda for what we'd like to see. And there's generally a split between the parties that have elected members in the House and the parties that don't.
Which is only those 3 or 4. Okay.
And so the parties that aren't elected, you tend to see them arguing for positions that are fair.
Which are 12 or 13 of them.
Not
counting the independents.
Right.
Okay. What I am hearing from you, they have to follow the mandate and the act.
Yep.
But the act, one of the responsibility of the chief electoral officer is either based on the meetings or frequent meetings that he has with you guys, or based on the request of the public, or based on their study, they provide some sort of the suggestions or advices to the parliament, so they can take it as under the consideration and provide acts related to the advice.
It is part of the act that after every general election, the chief electoral officer is required to supply to Parliament a report on the conduct of the election. And from time to time, the CEO provides a report to Parliament that will include and has included from time to time recommendations. And Parliament has to go along. So the CEO, based on what he thinks is best for the mandate of the organization, which is to facilitate the participation of Canadians in the electoral process, both as electors and as candidates. That's their mission statement. Based on what the CEO thinks is best for that, and having considered the input from other members of the ACPP and other bodies, the CEO will put forward his recommendations in his report to Parliament. And Parliament, for the time at least in which the Conservatives have been in power, Parliament has ignored recommendations that were good, or took recommendations that were well-intentioned and poisoned them, turned them into something completely different.
Because just last year, I think it's about just over a year ago, just about 14 or 15 months ago, they came up with a so-called Fair Election Act. Yeah. And that Fair Election Act, when I read that at that time, I didn't imagine that a large portion of that be as a result of the advisory of the chief electoral officer. No. I thought it's written very from the polarized point of view to just focus on certain things that is good for certain parties.
Yeah, it was a bit of a rhetorical shell game. In other words, it set up straw men, voter fraud being the big one. It set up straw men that didn't really exist. Voter fraud is not a problem in Canada. Electoral fraud is.
Of course, because the numbers does not really make that much of difference when we talk about voters fraud.
Right. So the act supposed that there were these kinds of problems, which there were not. and then impose solutions to these kinds of problems, which actually made things worse, because A, the problems didn't exist, and B, those wouldn't have been good solutions if they did, and C, the solutions that, or the so-called solutions that the Act provided actually made things much worse. That was Bill C-23, the so-called Fair Elections Act, and the so-called Fair Elections Act is really about stealing elections. It was about putting the architecture and the blocks in place for the Conservatives to be able to steal elections with impunity, without being caught at it.
So it is like a distractive kind of the maneuver.
Yep.
To get the point from, because most people they don't recognize the difference between voters fraud and electoral fraud.
Right.
Can you just explain in a simple language what is the difference between these two?
Voter fraud would be when persons who are ineligible to vote wind up voting. They have voted fraudulently.
If with a fake ID or with a fake slip or whatever.
Whatever the means
Yeah.
was, right?
And electoral fraud?
Electoral fraud is when there's an organized campaign by a political entity to create a certain kind of an outcome.
So, so let's assume there is a riding, a district, electoral district. Let's say Toronto Danforth or Toronto Centre or anywhere else. If there is a case of voters fraud, what is the maximum number of the voters could go there and do the same thing? They cannot load the people in the bus and bring them and shove them to the electoral polling station. Can they?
Well, John A. MacDonald could do that and did, but
well, you are talking about
Mackenzie
the
Ball.
John A. MacDonald.
the John A. MacDonald, yes.
Oh, he was a conservative too.
Yes, he was a conservative too.
Okay.
So was Arthur Meighen and Robert Borden, and they cheated at elections too. And
but that
Bryden-
was electoral fraud.
Yeah.
But it was managed as it was appeared as a voters fraud though.
Oh, I don't think
Because the organization was electoral, but the people, individuals, did that as a voters fraud.
Yeah.
Okay, in the modern day history, let's say from 2006 onward or 2003 onward, what are the examples of the electoral fraud?
2006, the example that stood out most was the In-N-Out scandal, which was where the Conservative Party of Canada organized a campaign to overspend election advertising limits. And they did it knowing that it was illegal. They did it having been advised by their own lawyers that it was illegal. They did it having been advised by other lawyers that it was illegal. And they did it in at least 63 or 61 or 63 ridings where they shoveled money from the Conservative Party of Canada into the individual campaign bank accounts of candidates that they had in the running.
As a transfer to the
As a
candidate.
transfer, which is legal.
Yeah.
A legal
Through
transfer.
the association.
Whether it comes directly or through the association
Okay.
doesn't matter. It's still legal to transfer from the
Of
political
course.
party to a campaign or from a electoral association to a campaign. And
For them to
for the
use it for themselves.
for the campaign to use as they see fit.
Okay.
Right. That's not what happened. What happened was is the Conservative Party of Canada shoveled the money into the individual accounts, giving the
money to the candidate.
agents, the candidates' official agents, specific instructions to spend that money on advertising message that was already purchased and in the can and had been broadcast to the legal spending limit already in Canada.
For the party,
For the party.
not for the individual riding.
Right.
So that means they just look at the law. They said, okay, how we can get around it, and then they went around and just used the money.
Right.
So is it a form of money laundering, isn't it? Or campaign laundering?
Well, I wouldn't call it money laundering. I would call it electoral fraud, because they did this to create a specific outcome, and they did it comprehensively.
So this is the cut by Elections Canada. I remember.
Elections Canada caught it. The chief
Okay,
electoral
and
officer.
what did they do?
Well, they assembled the file, basically, and then the chief electoral officer at the time in Canada resigned.
Kingsley?
Kingsley resigned.
Yeah, okay.
And a new chief electoral officer was appointed, Mark Moran.
Yes, who is still
there. Yeah. Mark Moran looked, at the file when he came to office, and he said, what's this, basically. I mean, I'm putting words in his mouth, but he said, what's this? And looked at it carefully and said, this is voter fraud, or this is electoral fraud, not voter fraud, this is electoral fraud. And it's, or he might not have said that. He might have just said, this is outside the rules. And
Okay.
so he promptly began to apply the law.
And what's happened?
The Conservatives attacked him as if he was a stooge of the Liberals.
No, what's happened to the 63, 66 people who got the money and then they spent it there? What's happened to them?
Many years later,
Many years later.
there was
a couple
deal.
election later.
Many years later, there was a deal cut. 5 people, I think 5 people in the Conservative Party of Canada got charged.
I remember 4, but
Yeah.
maybe you're right.
Some of them pled guilty to a lesser charge, and I think the Conservative Party paid something like
So
$93,000 in fines.
they never convicted in the court of law, though.
Well, they pled guilty to a lesser charge.
To whom? To Elections Canada? To the
It is
arbitration
it's
system?
It's a criminal charge.
Yeah.
It's a criminal charge. Those kinds of offenses,
Yeah.
when they happen within the Elections Act, are prosecuted in the criminal law realm. So it's a criminal charge.
But I never heard of the court proceeding regarding that.
Well, I don't know if it ever went to court. I mean,
Probably they did it just before they getting to the court.
well, presumably, I mean, if they're pleading guilty anyway, I don't know if the people who were charged and convicted ever appeared in court. Their lawyers could have entered pleas for them, and they simply paid the fines and
And
moved on.
the total, the damage they paid back was.
I think it was $93,000 in fines. They
It's
paid.
not a bad investment to have the whole government for yourself.
Cost of doing business.
Cost of doing business. No, I mean having a 97,000 investment. We have a government for a few years.
Yeah, hey, made their friends a lot of money. They probably.
So what's happened, and what is the another example in 2008? Apparently,
2008 and in 2011 was a voter suppression scheme, which is where
and
they
robocall.
launched robocalls to misdirect voters to keep them from casting their ballots, so that their guys could win.
So I'm just wondering, in Canada we have constitution.
Yes.
And we have rule of law, don't we? I mean, if I park my car, I don't have car, but if I have a car, if I park it on the street and it says, you cannot stay here, I get a ticket, and if I don't pay that, they add to that, and they don't renew my license, and my life will become miserable, and I have to go to court.
But in Canada, the reality is. The reality the Conservatives have experienced is if you commit electoral fraud and people don't find out before you form a government, you get away with it.
And there is there's nothing in the law that to prevent or at least to rectify the situation.
In what sort of a way?
I mean, for instance, from top of my head, if there is a government being elected based on the fraud, I call it illegitimate government, de facto government.
I do too.
Okay, if it is de facto government, then people shouldn't follow the law that passed by that de facto government. Am I wrong?
Parliament should have never assembled. It wasn't the first Parliament the Conservatives assembled was an illegal Parliament. It should have never come together because they weren't legitimate heirs to the throne, you might say. But once they have achieved the throne, then that becomes a much more difficult case to fight.
Yeah, because they have money of the people and they have the lawyers
and they're in power.
Paid to win the power.
And they're in power.
Now, having said that, now it is 10 years there, or almost 10 years, 9+ years. These people are in the power, regardless of whether they're good or bad. That is from the eyes of beholder. I'm pretty sure if you talk with the Conservatives, they praise the government as is.
Well, actually, that's interesting because there were some Conservative candidates when the in and out scheme went forward. There were some Conservative candidates who found out after the deed was done what happened, and they were furious. They were furious. They almost broke ranks. There were some Conservative candidates who were not scumbags. There were some Conservative candidates who were offended by what the Conservative Party of Canada did.
But they continue to work with them.
Well, you'd have to talk to them about that.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I can be furious about a lot of things, but if I don't have faith to my own principles, then
and do something.
and do something that. So, and nevertheless, now it is the past. So these people have been around, and they did that, and they have done all of these. And now we are coming to 2015. And it's supposed to be an election on October 19th.
Yes.
Usually federal election is 5 weeks campaign, usually.
36-day minimum usually.
Yeah. And there is a rumor that this federal government is going to drop the rate sometime next month. That means it gives, instead of 36 days, to 60 days campaign period. If it happens, based on what I have read, is a strategy to get the two other mainstream parties to the point of not having enough money to continue campaign or later start. Either way.
At least to wrong foot them.
Yeah. Now, having said that, my question from you is, do you think is he going to drop the rate, as the rumor says? It is your personal opinion. I'm not asking you to predict something.
Yeah, I suspect he will. Yeah,
he will. And if it does, based on the what you experienced in the past 7 elections that you ran yourself, and based on the quality of the campaign that Liberals and NDP put forth for this coming election, what are the chances of Conservative government loses again? I don't see that chances because I don't see the numbers adds up.
Yeah, I'm very concerned that they'll win again. If you could ever say they won before, because in 06, 08, and 11, they were all electoral fraud wins. They weren't legitimate wins.
Well, you see, maybe that was the main reason, or maybe that was those were factors to help them to win. But now they have Fair Election Act, which part of that is the ID issue, and part of the ID issue is disfranchise some of the voters.
Of course.
One thing.
Of course.
Second thing, the Canadians who are expatriate they are not allowed to vote under the certain circumstance up to 5 years or something like that.
There's a mechanism for expatriates who are qualified to vote, but it's worse than you just described, actually, because there are now people who are going to be disqualified from voting based on having been out of Canada for too long. But even those who are out of the country and who are eligible, the actual turnaround for the process to vote is going to be difficult to accomplish.
So they have to do something about that before being able to vote.
There's a special application process that they have to go through.
So they want to discourage them to not to vote.
They want them off the list.
I mean, if I am sitting in London, England, and I have to spend half a day to go through the process or do certain things.
Oh, no, if you're in London, England,
I'm not going to do that, and I probably.
If you're in London, England, and you want to vote on October 19th, and you're going to be in London on October 19th, you better start the process now, or you won't complete it.
Oh, now?
Now.
So it's not the process is not like a couple of the hours.
No. It's weeks.
And what process is that? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah,
can you just run me very fast?
There's an application that you have to make, and you have to identify a residential address in Canada, and there's a back and forth.
So they have to prove that they are Canadians, and they have to prove they are worthy of the voting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So if we put, we know around 40 or 50% of the people even don't vote.
Yep.
So out of the 50, we have 338 seats this coming election. Liberals already have about 39 of that, about maybe let's say 40. NDP has about 98 or 97, let's say 100. Even if these two get together, 140, they cannot make the majority government.
Yeah, that's true. But that would suppose that the Canadian voting population will have not noticed or will have forgotten. The stack of files that goes from floor to ceiling that the Conservatives have made a mess out of.
Are you really that optimistic that Canadian average voters remember all of that, or spend that much time to understand how the system works?
Well, they don't have to remember it all. All they have to do is remember one thing that really pissed them off.
Well, yeah.
And there's enough.
Oh, well, yes, there is enough. But usually, based on my experience in the last few years, I have noticed that large number, and I cannot say majority, but large number of the voters decide in the last week.
I know.
Now, right now, with the income split and child support supplementary, and God knows by the end of the September how many of the other ornament this government is going to provide for those demography who vote for them.
Right.
So it is a form of buying votes to me.
Right. And it has the effect of reducing the political attention span of a lot of voters to that of a brain-injured fruit fly, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, if that 40% just vote, just for the third, they call it fringe party, but the smaller parties or independents, probably they won't be able to get to that point. But that's never happened. Let's say coming back to the issue of the voters and how do you think voters can let me put the question this way: how can we educate voters or convey the message to voters that they have to participate in this election? Otherwise, the consequences of another majority conservative would be, I don't want to say dire, but it could be very severe.
Yeah, I really think that it comes down to eye contact
Between
people. I think people have to be willing to risk something in a relationship. So when you and I have a conversation, a lot of times we agree, sometimes we don't. And in order for us to be able to get to a place where we understand each other, and we maybe then agree or maybe agree to disagree, we have to risk something, right? That's our friendship.
That's correct.
Right? So if there's no trust between us, we have nothing to risk because trust isn't there, nothing risk.
Yes, because you are always alert about some.
So unless there's some kind of relationship that people value, that they want to protect, and unless they're willing then to put that relationship at some risk to talk about the real long-term consequences.
And these relationships, where it happens?
It happens in the coffee shop. It happens to, the
dinner table.
The dinner table. The people that you meet at the service club. The people who are engaged in civil life, and unfortunately, an awful lot of what people spend their time at isn't really civic engagement. It's just the nuts and bolts of making a living.
Well,
but even there, across the lunchroom table at work,
they can do that. And instead of talking about hockey, at least these few months, talk about something.
Talk about something of substance. Right? And so that's the first component, the willingness to risk a valued relationship. That's the first component. The second component is education. But that comes almost automatically when you start talking.
Well, of course.
Right.
Of course, you ignite something that people go there. Now, from perspective of individuals that who want to run, First of all, we have three mainstream party mainly. The other two mainly is very small. And then we have about 14 other smaller parties.
Yep.
Or more, it changes, fluctuates. And then we have independent candidates. Now, my question is not about three mainstream parties, its question is about the people who are part of a smaller party, who plan to run, and independents who either thinking, considering, or willing to run. How they organize their campaign, because they don't have the millions of the budgets, dollars of the budget that the mainstream parties have.
Right. Well, the process is quite simple. If you're affiliated with a political party, you need the endorsement of the party leader for you to run as a candidate. Then you need to go and visit your returning officer in your constituency, and you can phone Elections Canada to find out where that returning office is. But you go to the returning officer and avail yourself of a signature book. So in that signature book are spaces for names and addresses. The purpose of that book is that you go out into the constituency in which you intend to run and you talk to people. Have 100 people sign that book saying they're willing to endorse the idea that your name
100 eligible voters.
100 eligible voters
in that district.
Yes. 100 eligible voters who live in that district who are willing to support the idea that your name should appear on the ballot. It's not an endorsement or a commitment to vote for you. It is only
that acknowledgement that you spoke to them about your intentions.
That's right, and that they're okay with your name being on the ballot. So that and a $1,000 deposit.
Okay.
And then you return that book to the returning officer. They will go through the names and check off that there are 100 names there of people who live in the...
Is it a check across with their own voters list?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
They are not going to call people
No,
because there is no telephone number.
No, they're just going to call. So if they confirm that there's at least 100 names on that list of people who are willing to support your nomination as a candidate, and you pay your deposit, sign the forms, and you have an official agent whose job it is to make sure that you run your finances in accordance with the law in the Act. So you have to find someone who's
Elections Act.
The Elections Act. You have to find someone who's competent to oversee that, which when you're a small party and you have no money to spend doesn't mean very much.
Well, no, but still you have to go through the whole process.
Yep.
It doesn't matter if it is nil, if it is dollar, or if it is $100,000. You have to fill in the same paper process. You have to open bank account for campaign and so on.
Yep. And you have to have an auditor.
Okay.
An auditor's job is to go through and this is interesting because years ago already, the chief electoral officer, this gets back to something you were talking about earlier on. Years ago, the chief electoral officer recommended to Parliament that Parliament dispense with the requirement for an external auditor for campaign finance review for candidates that spent less than $10,000. Eminently sensible. Absolutely sensible. It saves all the time and the energy and the money for having external auditors review the books, most of whom come to the electoral process as newbies.
So give an example, for instance, if you were running at that time, what would happen? What difference would it make in your...
what difference it makes is I don't have to go through and fill out all the campaign finance reporting forms.
Yeah.
And then submit them to the auditor for the auditor to check them off, whether or not he knows what he's doing, and lots of times they don't. And then submit all the forms to Elections Canada to have their auditors check it all off and find all the mistakes that were or weren't made and all that sort of stuff. So where the campaign included less than $10,000 worth of spending, the chief electoral officer's
it's the same as the city of Toronto, municipal, yeah. You don't need auditor in municipal election, up to $10,000.
Right. So it's an eminently sensible step. And the reason why it's so sensible is because there's expense and time associated with all that stuff. If the auditor drops the ball and doesn't do his job, the candidate's still responsible. The candidate then has to go in and fix it somehow, usually with a court application and a whole lot of rigmarole. No one wants to go through. I've been through it. No one wants to do that.
And maybe just because of $2 or $3 difference.
Exactly. And so the external auditor adds no value to the system. It's a theoretical value add because it's a different set of eyes looking at it. But the reality is that most auditors who go through the process never want to do it again. It's a huge waste of time for them.
Unless the candidate and his agent or her agent
Has enough money to
has
pay them.
everything prepared properly,
Right.
and then
Right.
in fact, in Ontario,
But sorry, just
yeah,
to
go ahead. I'm
finish,
sorry.
Parliament wouldn't go along.
Oh, wouldn't.
Wouldn't.
Why is that?
You'd have to ask Parliament.
It is just dropping more stone on the way of those
I think
individuals.
exactly. It's to maintain barriers to participation in the process. because they
Discourage people from
discourage people from
take
running.
part.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just pull and push kind of thing. From one side, in the public, they say get involved with the political process. In another part, they go and put the laws
Once
not
they've got
to let them.
control of it, they want to make sure there's barriers to anybody else participating.
In Ontario Elections Act, they the same as federal, they subsidize for the audit.
Yes.
To some extent.
Yep.
Federal is better. Federal is, I think, it's 1,500 maximum, up to or 3% of the expense. But in Ontario, they have fixed amount maximum. And no matter even if you have nil, the auditor gets $1,300, $1,500.
Yeah, because it's frequently, even though there was no money spent, that's not the way the actual report will look in the end, because you have to have a bank account. And the bank account has charges, so it turns into a mess always.
Yes,
Well, not all.
what I'm saying, based on what you said just now, I suggested even to Chief Electoral Officer of Ontario that is redundant and at least put $5,000 up to $5,000, no auditor needed. If there is any discrepancy, you can call to the candidate or official agents, call CFO here to sort it out. But
Yeah.
they don't.
But here's the other part of it. You know, Elections Canada staff want nothing more than compliance with the Act. That's what they want. So in every instance, when I've gone through the process of campaign finance reporting, all this, if I have a problem, pick up the phone, call for advice. They're happy to give it to you. They want you to get to the process. They hate having a messy file on their desk.
Of course,
They want things to clean up and move on.
They
right?
don't. They don't like to just spend time to figure it out for $2, $3. Go through the paper shuffling.
But you don't need to be afraid as a candidate. You don't need to be afraid of the complexities of the process. Elections Canada staff will guide you through. They'll
Because
guide you
maybe
through.
some people who want to run, they're afraid of this thing.
Of all that administrative
Yes.
burden.
But there are help available.
There is help
as long as you are proactive to call them. And
once you're a candidate, they'll give you a specific
Okay.
hotline. You call up, you say you're a candidate, they'll put you right through to the finance department. Whatever your question is, they'll walk you through it.
Okay. Now, when it comes to the independents, of course, the process is the same.
Yes.
And this question I am about to ask you about, is about regarding financing. There is a limit of the expense for every candidate in every district.
Based on a spending
based
amount
based on
for
number of
each
the
candidate, for each voter.
Yeah. I think it's 95 cents or something like that per voter.
It's always there's a formula, and it's always changing.
It's always changing. Okay. Now, let's say we hypothetically there is electoral riding of the, let's say, again, Toronto Centre we are in right now, and the campaign, the maximum amount of the campaign that can be spent by a candidate is about, let's say, $100,000. I'm just using, it usually is 90 something or 18
It'll be
something.
more than that now.
But let's say 100 to be just keep the example easy. For this 100,000, if I am a candidate for NDP or Conservative or Liberal Party, what kind of I get, of course, help of the association and help of the party, and as well as my own endeavor to collect money for donations. When you are a small party candidate, which you do not have that infrastructure,
Right.
or you are independent candidate who you do not have more than 2 or 3 people around you, or 5 people maximum, your family members, how law act or elections act by itself consider as an even playing ground between these?
It's certainly not. It's certainly not. Particularly when, since the Conservatives have since they've come to power, they've made it more and more difficult to raise money for anybody. But they have, the Conservative Party has a money-raising machine. And, of course, the Conservative Party speaks to a constituency with money. Who do they look after? Conservatives look after the rich, right? The rich have money. Some of them might even spend it on the electoral process.
But under the Election Act, the companies cannot donate, can they?
No, corporate donations are illegal. No.
Okay. So how do they get, for instance, based on what I read last week on the paper, Conservatives managed to accumulate around $67 million since 2011 up until now.
Reported,
of course. Well, we are not talking about, they are very honest people. They don't.
Well, wait a second. Leadership contests, money raised and spent is not required to be reported if it happens outside the leadership contest period. And leadership contestants and the parties can decide to have that contest period be 1 second if they want to.
Can you come again about that to explain how it works? Let's say the Liberals, they had a
leadership convention.
Leadership convention, let's say, to bring Justin Trudeau.
Right.
Okay. What happens?
They decide to have the convention.
Okay. Let's say January 1st. 2015.
Right. And they decide that for the contestants,
yes,
for the leadership, there will be a campaign period.
Okay.
Okay.
So the campaign period is 2 weeks, let's say.
Let's say it's 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So the campaign period is from December 15th, let's say, to January 1st.
Yeah.
All right. So all the contestants can spend money on their campaigns. And they
during the campaign period?
Before and after.
Before and after, okay.
They can spend before, during, and after.
Okay.
But the way the law is written,
okay,
they're not required to report money that they raised or spent if it was raised and or spent
outside
before
of
the campaign period.
Before the campaign period.
Or after the campaign period. The only money they have to report is money that they raised and or spent during the campaign period.
So let me change the scenario a little bit tighter. Let's say they make the campaign period between December 28th to January 1st, which is 3 days.
Right.
But they start campaigning months before.
Right.
And let's say they raise $5 million or $10 million.
It's all black money.
$10 million.
It's all black money.
But during the 3 days, they spent $100,000.
Right.
So they are $9,900,000 have in their pocket.
Yep.
They don't have to report that to Elections Canada. Where that money goes then? Now, let's see, fast forward, it is October 19, 2015, and it is the election time, and they have 60 days period for the national federal election. If they want to use that money for their campaign, doesn't Elections Canada ask, where did you bring that money from?
Yeah.
And how do they respond to that?
It could be a loan.
Loan? From whom?
Well, now, technically, the loans are supposed to happen from chartered financial institutions.
Yes.
So the days when they could loan themselves money from one pocket to the other are theoretically gone.
Or the money could be spent in certain things that not being reported, which makes it illegal.
Right.
But who is going to find out?
If they're not ever reported, then...
Who is going to find out?
Right.
So go back to the question, $67 million that they collected during last 4 years. I'm talking about Conservatives. If there is no corporate contribution or business contribution, and if the maximum contribution for individual is $1,200,
it's $1,500 now.
Now it's $1,500. I think recently, how much? A year or 8 months or something like that.
Yep.
Let's say even $1,500. Are you telling me that they had that kind of the support that they managed to collect $67 million of the $1,500 each?
Well, the question is even more dramatic than that, because they claim they collected it in $5 and $10 increments. How many people does that mean contributed to the Conservative Party in Canada in the last few years? If they're collecting this in $5 and $10 increments, and they have $67 that they're reporting in their slush fund, how many? That's significantly more than the population of Canada contribute apparently to the Conservatives, and I sure don't.
So that means they must have about a couple of the million people to donate, let's say, $30 each year, let's say. Then it's 6 million, 2 million, 60 million, and something like that.
And I think, my estimation, but my guess would be that the number of people who actually voluntarily contribute to the electoral process in Canada, probably something like 1% of the population.
Well, I believe you. I believe you, because unless someone is being instructed by somebody or some boss or some sort of the
your job depends on it. Make this contribution.
Leader, yeah. So 67 million. Let's say they write. They are very honest people, and they collected during last 4 years with the $15. It reminds me of talking of Obama. You remember, he was saying, "Oh, we managed to spend $2 billion by $15 donations." I don't know how they managed that. Now, this 67 million, if they are spending, and they win the election, what's happened? Do they go to zero again for the next period?
No, all the money that they spend in the campaign period,
okay,
they're eligible up to a limit for a 50% reimbursement. So that
based on the number of the votes they receive, or based on the
based on being eligible for a reimbursement of expenses. It used to be based on a per vote subsidy, not anymore.
So if I am an independent candidate or a small party like a Canadian Action Party, let's say,
you'll get nothing.
And if I spend $2,000, do I get anything back?
You won't get anything back unless you get 5% of the vote in the constituency, or 2%
that is
of the
why
vote,
I said
or 2% of the vote nationally.
Okay, so every law is written just for the three mainstream parties.
Yes, indeed.
So much for democracy. So then they get the money back, and
they get up to 50% of it back for the party.
Yeah.
And I think I forget what the reimbursement is for candidates as well. But
so just the party. Let's say if they spend that nationally 67 million or 60 million, let's say, for
they'll
sake
get
of
30 million back.
They get 30 million back. Is this 30 million goes back again to the treasury of the party and is being used for the following election, or it can be just withdrawn from the bank and goes who knows where?
Well,
what is the Elections Act says? I mean,
yeah.
my point is, Election Act say, okay, I give it. You see, if I am filing my income tax, at the end of the year, if I get $1,000 back, that is the tax that I overpaid, and I get it back. In the following year, I'm not claiming that $1,000 because it was adjustment to my income tax.
Right.
But these people get 30 million out of the 60 million that day.
Yeah.
Is it considered to be as the asset for the party?
Yes.
Okay, so it has to stay with the party.
Well, it's tempting to say the party has to account for how they spend it, but actually, if you see what's happening now, the Conservatives are doing lots of attack ads against Justin Trudeau.
Okay.
Who's funding that attack ad? Where's that money coming from?
Well, we have third-party advertisers here, don't we? It's like a pack in the United States. We have some.
There's rules around third-party participation during an election period, but before the writ drops, there's no rules.
So it comes back to the same thing as a leadership contest.
It's pretty much the same.
So they are doing whatever they can do, no matter who knows how much money is spent by whom.
Right.
Whether or not if the individual or corporate or union or association or anything like that. to just put their ad like free speech, I want to say Justin Trudeau is bad, for instance.
This is why the small donation line works so well, is because you're not required to report donations of less than $20, and you're not required to report the names of people who donate less than 200, I think.
That's correct.
So it's very convenient to claim that you raised all this money in 5 and 10 and 15
without revealing the
donations,
source.
because it allows you to hide your sources. Unless somebody actually does this sort of forensic accounting and figures out that there aren't enough people in Canada to create that kind of a money pool through $5 and $10 donations.
We just calculated it.
Of course.
I mean, the whole number of the members who were elected in 2011 and formed the government, they only represent 18% of the eligible voters in Canada.
Right, and presumably the other 72%.
No, there is another 12% for the rest of the two other party. So 70% is still.
But presumably those guys aren't donating to the Conservative Party of Canada.
Yes, you're right. You're right. You're right. So 82% didn't donate to the party. So whatever money they got from 18%. Yeah. If they were hardcore supporters.
And if that's the case, it didn't come in $5 and $10 and $20 donations.
No, therefore they have to be reported according to the Act, to the Elections Act.
Right. So any way you do this, to me, the numbers don't make sense. But here's the other side of it. The Commissioner of Elections, whose job it is to investigate these kinds of things, does not have the power to compel evidence.
So what authority Elections Canada has as of now? Let's say forget about Conservative Elections Canada. I am running as an independent candidate, and I am being suspected of doing something wrong in my campaign, finance or otherwise. Right. What Elections Canada? What is the authority of Elections Canada? He found out Bahman Yazdanfar is
if they have a problem,
didn't report $1,000. Let's say.
Okay, so they'll get a hold of you. They'll say, "We're looking at the financial reports. We have this problem. Can you resolve it?" So you go through those steps. If there's no resolution, they will say to you, the Act says that we have to do this, and we have to do this, and we have to do this. And if we don't get resolution, at that point, we will refer the matter to the Commissioner.
And what the Commission is?
The Commissioner will investigate.
Who is the Commission?
A guy's name is Yves Côté.
No, is he related to the Elections Canada,
Not
or
anymore.
is he related to the PM?
Not anymore. Bill C-23 took him away from Elections Canada and made him a part of the Department of, or the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Public Prosecutions?
Yes.
Which is supervised by whom?
Saunders. The guy's name is Saunders.
No. I mean, which entity in the government?
The AG.
Okay, Attorney General.
Attorney General.
Okay.
Yeah. The Director of Public Prosecutions reports to the Attorney General.
So they report my name to them, and then what they do?
Well, no, the Elections Canada will refer your file to the Commissioner of Elections.
Okay.
The Commissioner of Elections will then investigate.
Okay.
If he sees fit.
Okay. If he sees it, so it is in their discretion of one person then?
Well,
or two person?
There's a framework.
Yeah, okay.
There's a framework by which, he will check with certain metrics about whether or not this is going to be.
Okay.
So at that point, the Commissioner will get in touch with Mr. Yazdanfar and try to resolve the issue. If they don't resolve the issue, the Commissioner will then get to a place where he may recommend charges under the Elections Act to the Director of Public Prosecutions. And if the Director of Public Prosecutions agrees that you should be charged, the Director of Public, the DPP, it's hard to say, the DPP will charge you with an offense under the Act, at which court then you go to court under a criminal process, criminal sanction.
Like the one that recently happened, and they took the member, what was his name?
You're talking about Del Mastro?
Yeah. Del Mastro, yeah. Mr. Mastro, yeah.
So, but I mean, Del Mastro's case was he put $20,000 into his own campaign.
His own money to his campaign, yeah.
It was illegal.
Yeah.
Then he covered it up.
And he didn't tell?
And then he lied about it.
And he's conservative, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
Then he lied about it, and he got caught in all of that. And when
they are not very smart people, even though when they do the fraud, because every time they do something, it comes up.
Well,
so they are like a Teflon, but they are not.
The process, the public doesn't seem to remember which is amazing.
That is why earlier I said the memory span of the public.
And Del Mastro was Harper's parliamentary secretary for a while. He was the poster
he
boy.
was like a bulldog. He was yelling and shouting and
yeah. Meanwhile, he's a fraudster, right? So does something illegal, knows it's illegal, lies about it, gets caught, does the whole cover-up thing, goes through the whole process. It takes years, but now he's headed for jail, finally. Does the public remember? Don't know. Why not? Well, one of the reasons I think we can point at is it just took too damn long. Just took too long. And
so the judicial system is so slow. By the time to get to one of these resolutions, it has been 4, 5, 6, 7 years later, and we could have had 2, 3 more elections in the process, and by then,
what are you
really, that is not even important anymore.
Well, it's still important. The question is, what do you do about it?
No, I mean, it's not important because the outcome of the following election really is
delivered.
not connected to what it has done.
So the fundamental tenet of the democratic process then has been separated, right? Because what's supposed to happen is, the electorate are supposed to listen to politicians and make promises, and then later on they're supposed to compare notes about whether or not their promises and their actions actually lined up. But when the campaign itself has been fraught with fraud and cover-ups and lies, and the mechanism of uncovering that takes more than one electoral cycle, it's impossible for the system to function anymore.
No, because they are not congruent with each other.
Of course.
It is completely off the sync.
It's completely out of sync.
It's like all the Chinese dub movies, that action and the talk was completely off each other. Is there by the way, this Attorney General and the Office of the
Director of Public Prosecutions,
Direct Prosecution, ADDP, you said?
It's the DPP.
The DPP. Who are they affiliated to these political parties?
They would say not, but of course the Director of Public Prosecution's office was set up by Harper in 2006, 2007.
So there is a bias over there.
I'm sure they wouldn't admit to it.
No, I'm pretty sure they don't.
And the DPP only reports now, because C23, the DPP, the Commissioner of Elections used to be a part of Elections Canada and used to have the power to investigate and charge. So Bill C2 in 2007 came forward, they separated.
C32, you mean?
No, Bill C2.
C2, okay.
Back in 2007.
2007
right.
You're talking about.
That was the first attack. That was the first non-budget piece of legislation that the Conservatives brought forward. And the most important parts of it was they began to dismantle the Canadian electoral process right then. And one of the things they did was they stripped the Commissioner of the authority to charge people under the Elections Act and vested that with the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, an office they just created with Bill C2.
So if there is, let's say, in 2015, October 19th, something happened, which always happens, and the Elections Canada finds out, let's say, number of the candidates from Liberal Party or NDP or Conservative Party violated the rules and act or neglected, not necessarily knowingly, and then they do the prosecution depending on the government or elected government or future elected government. That Attorney General decides that who goes to the being followed up to the court or who doesn't.
No. First of all, it's going to depend on whether or not the candidates or the political entities are persons of goodwill. Because persons of goodwill will go through the dispute resolution mechanism that's built into the Elections
let's say
Canada
to
Act.
get to the point that there is no resolution, and it got to that point of
all right. So then it got to the Commissioner. The Commissioner investigated, went through the steps, turned the file over to the DPP. The DPP then decides whether or not to charge.
Okay. This DPP, let's say, after October 19, because this things takes months after that. And let's say the future government, just for sake of discussion, we change it to Liberals.
Right.
They change.
Right.
Miracle happened. conservative didn't get elected. The liberals had a good faith from God or whatever it is, and they get elected. So the first thing they are going to do, they change the person in the DPP then.
They might.
Because they don't want to have someone who is mainly sit there as a supporter of the Conservative Party.
Well, if I were making that decision, I would certainly say that I don't want to have someone there that it takes 4 or 5 or 6 years to get to a charge.
No, you don't want to say that, but they don't care. Because one of them or their own member may be in the jam too. So if it happens, now if there is 3 people from 3 parties are violated, the ones who have the government probably least likely to be prosecuted to the extent. Unless it is very civil, like Mr. Dimas, and I don't know what happened, how that happened. This guy was the spokesman of the party for a few years.
You know, Del Mastro, it seems to me, was astonishingly stupid in what he did and the way he conducted himself. Everything. It's.
But they had a couple of the other MPs in the Eastern and the Canada as well.
Same stuff. They seem to think the law doesn't apply to them. It seems as if it's their position would, if I were to state their position, it would be that, well, we wrote the law so we don't have to obey it.
But from perspective of the candidate, I'm just wondering, because I ran federally as well as provincially, let's say that $20,000, how much vote can it buy? I mean, what they have done with that 20,000 that really helped them to the point to violate to break the law.
Oh, because it's the way advertising works. It doesn't matter that you're part of the field. What matters is that you stick above the field. So when everybody else spends the limit, where you really get bang for the buck is what you spend over the limit. That's what really wins for you. So if the limit is $80,000, everybody spends $80,000. Everybody gets the same bang for the buck.
That 20,000 gives you a little bit edge.
No, that gives you a huge edge because it puts you above the crowd. That's where you get noticed. When you spend beyond the limits, that's where you get the bang for the buck. That's why the $1 million the Conservatives spent in 2006 worked so well. Read Naomi Klein, No Logo. Explains it all. Read Marshall McLuhan, How Advertising Works. That's what you want. If everybody else is spending near the limit, if you want to win, overspend, because you get huge bang for those dollars that you overspend, as long as you can get away with it.
So we live in the monocracy, or moneyocracy, not democracy today. How much do we have, Chris? I'm already over? Why? What time is it? It is for? It has been? I don't think so. Okay. We are getting to the end of the line, end of the program, I mean, and not end of the line because of the government, of course.
There's lots to talk about.
Now, let me ask you a couple questions before we close the program. Are you planning to run this year?
I'm not planning to run.
You are not planning, but it could change.
It could change.
It could change. Well, you haven't made the decision yet.
I have not made it.
If you run, do you want to? Are you going to run in where you live, or do you plan to run somewhere else? I'm not saying where you live, but I'm just asking.
Yeah, I'm in the process of making another major move.
Yeah. Okay.
Came here from British Columbia 12 years ago, and we're in the process of going back.
Okay, if it happened before then it could change a lot of things.
We'll just have to see.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
If I get there and settled in time and all
I
that.
personally hope to see more people to run, because I think more candidates gives a little bit of the nudge to the mainstream party candidates to work a little bit harder.
There isn't a piece of sort of defensible legislation. There's, especially in terms of social policy, there's almost nothing that Canadians are proud of in the social policy realm that didn't come from a fringe party. The main parties never bring anything forward unless they have to, and they only do it because of the electoral threat that the fringe parties pose.
So they just calculate what is our threat, what is our opportunity. Based on that, we pass the introduce the bill and then we run.
They'll steal from the other guy's platform to cut them off, right?
Thank you, Will. First of all, thank you for coming. You're one of the, as I said, not only you're my friend, but you're one of those guests that really take time to travel 3 hours each way to come here. And I hope to see you as a candidate in the upcoming election, just because bringing issues to the table. I hope people like you always get to win, but based on what you just alluded, is a little bit kind of the task of Hercules in this environment.
You do what you can.
Okay. Do you have any last message before I close the program?
Only to thank you for the opportunity. We're like-minded in trying to raise awareness for Canadians and to point at what we think the issues are and hopefully move them to action.
We can only hope.
We can only hope.
Thank you very much for joining us today. And today is July 28, 2015. I hope you learn a lot about the electoral process. And as Will said, it's not as difficult as you might think. It's just take a little bit initiative, a little bit work, but there are help available for you. And please remember, participate in your electoral process, vote for sure, be volunteer, become a volunteer, help a candidate, and better, become a candidate yourself. Thank you, and good night.